Hello, thank you very much for being here. Hayden, I want to start with you. So prior to the pandemic, business leaders tended to prefer to keep things contained within their four walls. Of course, freelancing was popular, but it wasn't hugely popular like it is today. And when the pandemic started, a lot of companies had to pivot very quickly and didn't have those resources in-house to change their business models, to go remote, to offer their products and services remotely. And so, as you know, there was a huge boom in freelance utilization at that time. Do you get the sense that a lot of those opportunities are going to stick around, or was this more of a one-time boom that will sort of go back to a preference for keeping things primarily in-house after the pandemic? Have we broken that barrier permanently, or is this more of a reactionary situation?
Jared, this has been a huge breakthrough for businesses. I mean, certainly the trend towards online freelancing has started before the pandemic, but what we saw last year was a watershed moment for businesses and for professionals because both parties really want control. Freelancers figured out that they can get more control over their work lives, over how they work, when they work, who they're working for, by really embracing the online freelancing model. And we saw that as they rushed into this model in bigger numbers than ever before. Businesses have just started to figure out how much more control they can get with this model, augmenting traditional employees and augmenting older kind of contingent staff models, which really didn't give them the flexibility and the control that the online freelancing model gives them, accessing talent, which is the core thing that they need to get all of their priorities done. And as I talk to CEOs who are like desperate to get back to work, to do more this year and going forward, the number one thing they need is the key talent in their organizations to get these projects going. And so they can't just hire employees to get all these things done. They need flexibility, they need adaptability, they need to do these things in really cost-effective ways. And so as we look at what the organizations are looking to do going forward, it's not about going back to old models that were serving them before the pandemic. They're really seeing that working with freelance talent is a critical third way that they need permanently as part of their working models and talent access model after this pandemic is done.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And John, when most of us think about having an online chat conversation, a lot of people would have just a few specific platforms in mind, maybe Slack or Facebook Messenger or whatever it might be. What are some of the places where having that text-based chat platform proves incredibly powerful and incredibly important that people don't often associate with online chat?
Yeah, I think a lot of the conversation people have actually in digital space revolves around the specific context. Let's say if you're having a conversation with your doctor, you probably don't want to add that doctor on, let's say, Facebook or Twitter. You probably want to retain the conversation specifically on the healthcare platform. So if you're on a dating application, again, you want to retain the relationship within the specific dating application as well. So as kind of the more of the app economy has really accelerated throughout the pandemic, we're seeing more of this adoption in healthcare, which was a really, really big surprise for us because it revolves a lot with like the regulation, and really the nations across the globe has changed their regulations to meet this or serve this telemedicine industry and really enable this experience to happen. Also in the food delivery space too, there's a lot of conversation between the delivery folks with the customer to really expedite the order fulfillment and then successful ratio. And then again, the dating experience was a really interesting shocker for us because a lot of people opted into like audio dating as well as video dating as well. People still do want to build relationship during this pandemic. So that was a really, really interesting trend for us. And then lastly, we saw this incredible rise of fintech across the globe, people sending money with each other, ordering financial products on some of these applications through this chat experience was something that was really, really interesting to us, that we saw a lot of growth really across the globe.
Fantastic. And Christian, pitch decks, which is the space you work in, they're often entirely digital, but they're very much based on a traditional analog technology, specifically a static sort of slide projector. What does a digital first presentation slide look like, and what can it do that a traditional slide deck can't?
It's a great question. So We have actually started Pitch with the idea of building a modern collaborative presentation software for teams. And we kind of started with the idea of not trying to imitate a physical device like a projector that you just mentioned. And I feel like most software that teams have had before Pitch were actually just imitating an old school traditional device, kind of like they tried taking the projector to the screen. And what we are trying to accomplish is really to change what presentations are and move them forward and make them living documents rather than like static PDFs that people send around that can be filled with live data, data from like third-party services, or like live embeds from the web, like a tweet and stuff like that. So we really want to change how presentations are being built within teams and also how they're being shared and received by the rest of the world.
Mm-hmm. And so we're having this conversation at a very interesting time. It's been a whole year of this, primarily remote work world. I've been doing it for like 8 years now, but a lot of people have only been doing it for 1. But it's been a long year. A lot of new habits have been formed. And at the same time, we're starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel. Very hopefully, this will be over soon enough, and we can get back to regular life. And when we're talking about collaborating screen to screen, being the topic of conversation for this panel, in what way do you think collaboration is necessary to happen in person, and what will go back to being primarily in-person parts of the collaboration process in the future? And what do you think is going to be forever changed by this past year? And I'll let anybody jump in. John, you want to start?
Sure. I think there are roughly like 3 ideas that we start to recognize in the past 12 months. Is one, people will have a much, I guess, harder, stricter prioritization filter when it comes to how they collaborate. Before, you drive up 1 hour to a city to have a 30-minute coffee with someone else and spend another hour coming back to your office. I think people will think twice before taking that kind of big commitment. Now people will think about in a more fluid way, do I actually need to meet this person, or is it actually enough to just have a voice call or video call conversation? So one is a much better prioritization around collaboration. 2, I think this is more of a newer trend that we start to see a lot in some of the younger generations, the nomadic workforce. Now people are recognizing that they can work remotely, they can kind of work wherever they want. So people will want more flexibility where they work, and also I think there will be some initial pushback in terms of like what people call revenge traveling. So people will want to get out and actually be able to work somewhere else. So I think there will be some temporary shift there. Now, lastly, is probably the acceleration of digital communication. So people now will be working in remote locations. So the work by default will have to shift towards more of an asynchronous collaboration than synchronous. So because we're not in the office all the time, we won't be on video calls all the time. So we'll be working through things like chat, but also like documentation so that you can collaborate across different time zones, and then only jumping on the synchronous calls like audio or video calling when it's necessary. So we have to figure out how to work in asynchronous format, be able to approve things, but also how do we augment those conversations that are missing in digital world, like the nonverbal communication as well as 3D presence. These are things that technology still have to improve and augment. So I think those are the areas that we'll have to, I guess, figure out in the next coming years.
Yeah. Hayden, do you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think John's absolutely right. And I think one thing I'd want to add to your comments, John, is, there's, I think, a real question out there that a lot of business leaders are asking, which is, can my team form relationships that are meaningful around my work with other parties who are not in the office or meeting face-to-face constantly with my team or with me? And our company's been doing remote work and facilitating remote work for 20 years. And I can say with confidence that actually that can be done. Infrequent face-to-face communications in person can be enough to form really good working relationships. And in fact, digital only relationships can be really, really strong and powerful. We see that all the time with the work that our remote freelancers are building with clients on our platform, where these relationships last quarters, years, and span, even sometimes clients moving from company to company and taking those work relationships with freelancers with them. So I think this fear factor of, oh, I can only have real work relationships with people that I've met in person or I'm seeing all the time in person, is actually going to be something that people are quite surprised. Digital tools like Upwork can actually facilitate deep working relationships between clients and freelancers or between people across teams. And that's something that I think people are going to realize is very profound as a new aspect of their working worlds in the post-pandemic era.
Okay. Kristen, did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I think a lot of important points have been mentioned. I think offices will have somewhat of a comeback for sure, but the purpose of having physical locations will change. I think most of us will have a strong desire for a change of scenery once in a while, and will visit the office for those kinds of things, like to meet other people. That said, I think all of us, or most business leaders, just have to learn to think beyond just productivity of human beings in an office. We have to think about how to keep our staff happy doing, like, especially like in remote work, right? How do you take care of your coworkers actually? And that means you have very different challenges. That said, I feel like I don't see a huge shift in society. For me, it just feels like an evolution. Now all of us have learned very quickly that remote work is possible, yeah, now we'll just move forward and we'll look for the most efficient tools to get the work done.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. So we just spoke a moment ago about how you can do a lot more with the pitch deck when you remove the concept that it should be this sort of analog thing just transferred to a digital format. And I wanted to apply that thinking to remote work, because often when there's a transition like the one that we had this year, it's really about taking the in-person experience and mimicking it as best as possible remotely. But what do you think is going to happen as we start to think about remote first experiences, not designed to mimic in-person experiences and collaborations and relationships, but are designed from the start to exist fully remotely? And John, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah. If you think about, so I think the theme here is like what we internally call as a systematic and a very programmatic digital relationship building. So what I mean by that is in let's say workplace or any office space, you would have like someone like an architect or someone like people and culture team carefully planning out spaces like atriums, lobbies, meeting rooms and kitchens to facilitate that conversations, like spontaneous relationship and cross-pollination of work and ideas. And now, because we're now have to think through the digital first kind of workplace, we internally call the people and culture team needs to intentionally plan out venues and ways for people to stay engaged, collaborate meaningfully, and build this network of relationship that's beyond the immediate teams and projects. So it's almost like creating a job called like architect for digital workplace, so that this is like a digital first kind of mindset in terms of how we architect the collaboration and space. And I think it has to be really, really intentional.
Absolutely. Well, maybe there's some freelancers who can take over that role, which brings me to Hayden. I wanted to ask you the same question. What does sort of a remote first relationship look like, other than just taking what was done in person and trying to mimic it as best as possible remotely?
Jared, I think what is so mind-blowing about this, as I see the transformation that our clients and our freelancers go through as they discover what is possible when they fully embrace working remotely, is this transformation of not just where they're working, but how and with whom they're working. Because companies are waking up to the fact that all of their days in the past were spent in this mindset of scarcity. They were going through their days feeling like, I can't do this, I can't get that done, this is not possible for my business, whether you're a small company or enterprise, because the limitation was people that they didn't have access to, talent and skills they could not get to, and ways of working that were very old and archaic in these old systems of how and where they were working. In the new reality of remote work that lets you tap into anyone in the world with every single skill set available, which is a profound thing when you think about it, companies and talent can now live in the world of full possibility, and literally everything that they want to do for their business, they can find that person on a platform like Upwork or another online freelancing platform, but Upwork, I'll just say, they can literally find the person to do that work, which is literally a mind-blowing thing for them. It opens up all of the possibilities to get things done that they previously thought were not possible for their business. And it is so exhilarating when you see companies going through this awakening of, oh my gosh, I can actually do all of these things now. So I think it is a profound shift from the old mindsets and behaviors of the past.
Fantastic. And Kristen, you're actually helping to sort of facilitate that transition in a certain way with Pitch. Can you talk a little bit more about what those relationships would look like built from remote first perspectives?
Yeah, it's a fascinating question because one thing that I observe in the world of software development and product design is that we now not only think about making humans more productive, more efficient, especially in a remote context. Now we all of a sudden think about how to bring the fun back to software. One thing that I felt like was like we've just launched in the middle of a pandemic. And one thing that we were discovering right before launch was to bring the fun back to presentations through live audio and video integrations. And for the ones that haven't experienced Pitch, you actually enter a pitch deck and then you can start a live session and you have your video on the cursor and you can collaborate together. And it creates a really fun experience around real-time collaboration. And I think all of us can only have like 6-7 Zoom calls a day max, probably much less than that. And we are looking for new experiences that are fun, that feel more like a game. Lots of software developers and founders are applying game design now to the next gen tools. And I think we've just reached the starting point for that kind of evolution of productivity software. Like people are desperate now to find new solutions that bring back the fun really when you sit in front of your desk 8 hours a day.
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but Pitch actually has a feature, if I'm not mistaken, where you can have a piece of your slide deck that is a game that you can play on the spot collaboratively.
Exactly,
with
yeah.
Yeah.
We have a presentation center. Yeah, it is.
No, that's worth mentioning. And so in the last couple of minutes that we have here, one thing I feel like I have to bring up, because it's the buzzword of the day, is hybrid remote work. And there's a lot of people who will say it's the best of both worlds. There's a lot of people who will say it is the worst of both worlds. And I wanted to get everyone's perspective very quickly on a hybrid work environment. And let's just go in order. John, we'll start with you again. What do you think of hybrid as a working concept? Is it the best of both worlds or the worst of both worlds or somewhere in between?
Yeah, I think we just have to accept the reality that we have to learn and adapt our way through it. I don't think the rest of the world will all of a sudden be able to go completely remote. There's so much infrastructural changes that needs to happen, the regulatory implications. So I think broadly as almost like a human race, we'll just learn how to work even within the hybrid setting. What does it mean to set up a successful hybrid work relationship or environment versus what is a setup for failure? And I think there's a lot of nuance that needs to be learned there. One thing to really put in have that focus is to how do we level the playing field for people who are connecting from the remote side of the world? How do we make sure the information asymmetry doesn't get worse? How do we keep that engagement and the relationship building at an equal level? I think that's something that all the leaders have to be super mindful about. But as long as we have a couple of principles like those in place and we're really focusing and building our systems around that, I think there could be a path for hybrid models to work successfully.
That's good. Hayden, what do you think?
Yeah, John said it so well. I think that depending on how you operate, you can get the best out of what remote can do for you, or it can become the worst. Certainly, team members going into an office could be advantaged by a lot of things if the system isn't done well to make sure it is a level playing field. And certainly, companies are seeing how much benefit they get from diversity and inclusion, access to team members who are at the very edges of their organization who previously maybe couldn't get that access before or see into the center of the company before, that now over the course of the pandemic have gotten all of the communications, all of the visibility to leadership, all of that, which is really a benefit to everyone. So I think it does need to be done well. Companies are on a learning curve, but I think the realization that culture isn't about like posters on the wall in the office. It's about values and decisions and communication, and all of that is something that really companies need to lean into. live into those values and make sure that they are really learning how to manage team members for outputs, not about FaceTime, and not reverting back to some of those things that really were not serving us well in the past anyway. And so let's take what we've learned, keep learning on those things as we move forward, and not revert back to kind of the broken norms of the past.
Fantastic. We are technically over time, but I'm going to let Kristen just say a quick word. Hybrid, yay or nay?
Hybrid, yay. We've always been hybrid from the start.
All right, that's a good place to leave it. Thank you, all three of you, so much for doing this. And now back to the studio in Toronto.